and welcome to another episode of A Podcast. Your host, Stephen Maxted, and we have Mathew Grabau. Did I say that right?
Grabau.
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 Yeah, we just
Yeah.
went through that. I instantly
That's
paused.
okay.
Anyways,
Everyone
all right,
everyone knows.
Mathew Grabau with Grabau Innovations, Inc.
That's
Did I
right.
get that close enough?
Yes.
Close enough? Okay, sorry about that, man. We literally just talked about this before we got on here.
No
You
worries.
walked me through it because I was like, is he pronouncing it like, anyways, welcome to the episode, everyone. Listener, we have an exciting guest on today with Mathew and his time spent in tech and what he's doing now with his company and how he's helping other companies expand and grow their ideas with his skill set and background in engineering, I believe it was that I read. I don't know if we
That's
actually
correct.
put that, but I saw that on the website. And we have, you know, very different skill set than mine on that end of things. Both very type A's, we'll call it. But you know what? I'll pass it over to Matthew. I know that we also background here. We got connected through a good mutual friend, Marcus. Shout out to Marcus for being the glue and some networking recently. And maybe I'll pass it over to you to tell us, start that off a little bit about your storyline.
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, I'm an engineer by trade, by education and trade. So I went to the U of M here, born and raised in Winnipeg, and then from there I worked in several industries. So my resume probably looks a little strange that way in the early years, but in many ways, if you're like me, sometimes it takes a little bit to find your happy place or the one that gives you the most satisfaction day to day. And for me, it turned out getting to so after checking out aerospace and network security, which were both really cool and really a lot to learn there and very innovative. I found myself at JCA Electronics, which is now JCA Technologies. It's a very significant local company. If anyone takes a Google on them, they'll see a lot of press around some very significant accomplishments on their part in the autonomous agriculture space. So when I was there,
Yeah.
we were much smaller, and I really got my love for building from the ground up there, and that we were still trying to figure out what the right fit in the marketplace was for us. And with some wonderful insights, John and Darcy picked up on the fact that agriculture was really starting to take off. So there's lots of news stories you can find now about how automated agriculture has become and how vehicles drive themselves and so forth. But that was very nascent 10, I guess 11 years ago when we first started doing our initial projects. So that's and then that staged it onto Holly. I went on just to accept a newer, bigger challenge as JCA was growing, and after helping build the foundations there in our first few products and execute on projects. And then from there, I got the chance, a wonderful opportunity to work with a company called Rocket Res. They're out in Steinbach. They have an office in Winnipeg now. John's done a wonderful job setting up a SaaS company out in Eastern Manitoba there, and kudos to him. He attracted some very talented team members and has built a very strong company. They recently had a Series B. I'm sure maybe some listeners heard that on the local tech news, and so I left there earlier this year to after getting back into the agriculture space. So I found out about, I guess that need was still there, and that was calling back to me. So that was basically how I found my way back. Setting up a service business is a little different than just going and doing your day job, especially if your day job is building teams and stuff like that, because it obviously
Totally.
looks way different to build a team uh, when you do rely on projects and coming in. So it's been a great year of learning for me on many fronts.
That's awesome. And it's so cool to hear your story about how it sounds like in some ways we do have some over like well, big shout out in the soft end of my background in the ag sector. Had some great experiences there and did get in early stage with some different companies as well. More like sales and marketing, like or I guess there's a little tech the one with FBN there. They're kind of like Amazon for farming style thing. And
Right.
kind of familiar with wait, is it's Rocket Res, right? That's the company?
Rocket Res, yes.
Rocket. Okay, sometimes I mix up the words, 2 hours. But yeah, I'm kind of familiar with that storyline. Know some folks that have, yeah, worked with that team out there, or maybe are working out there now. with them. It seems like they're just doing some really great stuff. They had some weird timing, from my understanding, behind the scenes on launching the company during, like, right before 2020 hit, with the implosion of events not happening, so to say, right?
E- Exactly. They had really started to build out a more sophisticated and newer e-commerce platform component right when COVID was
Yeah.
starting to roll in 2020 there. And
Yeah.
I guess that's kudos to John's leadership and the leadership team that he had there, because they were able to come out quite strong from there. And then, furthermore, as the market rebounded, respond as trends reverted to the norms, they were able to respond accordingly and still grow a strong company.
Yeah.
You can find the story, but they were, when everyone else was kind of starting to no longer be the VC's darling, that was right when their funding came in. The beginning of 2023, it was announced, and that was when all you were reading was about the bad news in the tech sector. And yet, so I
Totally.
think that alone is just a testament to how wonderful of a job that John has done, and how much work he's put into that company. And
Yeah.
everyone that's there definitely is on a mission to change their space.
That's so cool. And that, I think that all those experiences, though, too, as you said, like, kind of the resume. I think if some people look at my resume too, they'd be like, "Hey, like, what happened here?" But no, it's kind of like at a further stage now, being on the own, we'll call it, and running companies. It's like less even about that. There's no resume to look at really anymore. Running the ship, but it's, when you look at all the different experiences, though, it makes sense why you're doing what you're doing now too, right? If you had the early stage, you've developed things. Now you're creating your own legacy in that way, right?
Exactly. And if you check out the LinkedIn profile, right, there's some other efforts dabbled in there of it was my best friend and I, and we were trying to make a go of it when IoT was also just emerging as the big buzzword, and everyone was talking about, I guess they're still talking about Industry 4.0, but at the time it was way earlier in the IoT space, and things like MEMS sensors that are now everywhere in your electronics, in your car, in your phone,
Right.
they're all over the place. Those were just coming really into the mainstream in terms of the technology price was coming down. Tesla was announcing the Model 3 just, a little bit ahead of that, or a little bit after that. And so we were trying to dabble in that. And we realized pretty quickly how challenging it actually is to run a company and still climb the ladder or try to do your best 9 to 5.
Totally.
And it
Yeah.
definitely complicates things, but those were some of the best times I had to just learning how to be entrepreneurs, because fortunately he was much better than that, and taught me a lot as we were going, because being a technical person, and I see this now, and I still even have to check myself on it. It's fun to build, and that's why at the end of the day I love what I do, but it also has to be checked against the competing trifecta of making sure that you also have a way to sell it and that people want it, and making sure that there's something sustainable there. The technology is often actually the feasibility of the technology is usually the easy part.
Right.
So sometimes, and this is something I found, especially in the startup community, not necessarily with my own experiences, but sometimes, especially as the market has emerged, and there's a whole range of companies that market to startups. And the trouble is it's
Mhm.
very easy to find people that will not help you go through the difficult process of developing and vetting your business idea along with your other concept. They're just there to put air in your tires because they want to get paid. It's a
Right.
service in itself, but that's not really what you need as a founder. You do really need someone to help you look at all aspects of it, especially the ones where you're
Yeah.
not strong. Everyone's got their natural tendencies. I'm
No,
not a
totally.
marketer by any means, which is why I'm really grateful to be with you here today, Stephen.
Well, yeah, we got chatting before here, and it was just funny to even hear, like, you chat about that, because it's like a thing I do every. It just comes so naturally, and you don't even, like, think. And well, even being specific in industry, actually, this is kind of like a good example of, like, you have to kind of almost, like, gauge, like, where someone else's, like, knowledge. There's no, like, scale of
Yeah.
1 to 10 on how good you are at talking about agriculture. But I found myself often, back when working in ag and then living in the city, I was just like trying to explain my job to people sometimes when we were selling like seed and chemical and talking farm stuff. I'm just like, what's like I always had to kind of like test, but we don't often do that with other things like but
No.
with marketing or how good are you at developing X. I don't even know enough about your space, for example, right? I'd be like just enough to know dangerous because bring it up and know some keywords. Actually, I do have some experience in the space, but not to your depth. So then it's like I'd be like like a 4 out of 10 on that one, right? But we don't
Yeah.
always like do that. And it's very analytical to
You
probably
know,
break down every conversation.
and recently I was just trying to learn about marketing and learning about things like, CAC and other concepts that are kind of foreign to me. And
Yeah,
realistically, when you're used to having wonderful people around you on a team that just they know how to crush it in their respective areas and that's what they're there for, you get there's a comfort in that and you can stay in
totally.
your lane and be in your space.
Yeah,
And you kind of see that. That's one of the first things that I found was all of a sudden it's either knowing when you need to bring in a partner and or when it's time to make a first hire or where your shortcomings are and you should get some better advice or some advice to help fill in the gap. Even one thing that recently I heard and I never thought of this is that Manitobans seem to be, maybe it's to our flaw, are extraordinarily generous with their time and advice.
yeah,
Many people are so willing to have a cup of coffee with you, and that's maybe all it would cost you is the cup of coffee and the half an hour of yours and their time, but they'll give you some wonderful helpful advice to just start out. I know I've been on the receiving end of it, and I hope that I will continue to have opportunities to reciprocate in that, and then it's useful for people.
totally. Very agreed with that. And I think we do have that as a luxury here because we're not quite big enough for there's too many like almost like connections that are weaved, right? Where like people are like,
Exactly.
oh yeah, I'll go grab a coffee. It's casual. Bigger cities it probably wouldn't happen like that.
No,
And just
or it'd be like you're paying for a service specifically, or that
totally,
and maybe
yeah,
that's to the detriment, but hopefully that work ethic continues and it continues to help people get established, because I think that's what'll make the ecosystem stronger.
yeah, agreed. Hey, what about a little bit more about you though? I know we've been chatting about
Sure.
this, but what
Yeah.
about you?
Wow.
No, 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 no. This is wonderful. I'm just like we should chat more. We should get back to the tracks here. What's your company doing?
Okay.
Let's
So
just
I guess recently everyone loves their IPs, so I don't know. I'm sure it's not unique, but I've decided to term it almost fuller stack development. So in a
okay,
way,
cool.
when it comes to enabling your product, it starts down if you need it at the sensor kind of hardware level, designing hardware IoT space, up to as you move into enabling some interaction with a tablet or another connected device and moving data onto the cloud and presenting and performing analytics and all the tools to manage that. So that's why I kind of call it fuller stack, because it includes that, we'll create the
Yeah,
hardware or find a solution for that if you need. There's been a focus, heavy focus on agriculture. So
yeah,
a lot of folks tend to be familiar with the larger players like the John Deere's or the ones that you recognize. If you're driving on number one heading east out of the city, you can see there's a few dealers there of other
yeah.
ones, New Holland, Case. Those are the big players. What a lot of people probably don't realize, I mean, you would by the sounds of it, because we have that
Yep.
overlap. There's like a second lane almost in agriculture and ag tech where there's a lot of companies out there that were founded in by an operator or a farmer that saw an opportunity come through from a struggle they were having. So, they decided that there was a better way to do something and they decided to solve that problem for themselves. And then from there, they realized that there's a product
You can
here
help.
and yeah, they need, so they can, they've committed to that. And so when those kind of companies are looking to take the next step or develop something new, that's been somewhere where I've gotten involved. And it's
Very
it's it's
cool.
a delight to work with such passionate and hardworking folks.
Yeah. But I think what you just touched on there too, kind of goes back to very like basic mindset in many cases, like on farm of being innovative because you have to. If something
Yeah.
breaks on the machine, probably not at like the level of like tech that you're, well, in the future, there probably will be that level of tech like innovation happening maybe on farm as people get more have more access to learning those kinds of things. But when you look at, if something was broken, how do we fix it? Sometimes it was welding the hammer onto the side of the, what I'm just making shit up here, but like,
But
they take like whatever, make it work because seeding and harvest are so small, and those are the two main parts of season, obviously like spray season and stuff we were talking about with
Oh yeah.
automation of you know, driving, and I think some of the projects you're probably working on before would be around that space. But yeah, always very industrious,
That
you know, in
that's the
nature.
thing. It looks slow because the machines move slow, but realistically, if you get stuck behind, say, a combine or a sprayer on moving down the highway, it looks slow, and when you
Right.
see them in the field, but realistically, all that action happens in a very, compared to a lot of companies, because that's what a farm is. It's a company. It's a
Totally.
sophisticated operation, especially these days. Uh, it's a short compressed window that those operators have to make, well, what sustains them for a year. So it's a very interesting industry, and in many ways that's what was captivating, was getting back to interacting with people that are both fantastic business people and they understand what they're doing to
Totally.
such a fine degree.
Yeah, and that is so awesome. Is there any like, for a listener who's probably like outside of, or it could be outside of like ag, and we dive a little deeper on some of the stuff that you're doing without like spilling beans on something that you shouldn't, if that's like a good way to like go about
Yeah.
it, or make up an example. I don't know. I'm just trying to think like, because we're kind of talking maybe a little like in industry, and I'm just thinking like, hey, like what would be a good way to explain like a project that you might be helping someone on. You might be tricky on this one because you're probably
This one's
behind
a
the
little
scenes,
tricky
but
because I always try
yeah.
to make sure that things are
Everyone's
obvious.
okay. Let's talk about like prior stuff that you worked on would have been like the like automated driving stuff, or yeah, autonomous, pardon me, driving, right?
Yeah, we were getting in there, and a lot of for example, inside your car, there's a lot of data, right? You can get apps and stuff and devices that'll help you plug in to get data from your car, and part of in a past life, some of that was figuring out what it means and how to utilize that in to augment it. For example, pulling GPS data from, there's a really wonderful GPS data, but to combine that plus, say, put that on a tablet and use that in the field, is
Yeah,
the ability to do something. Say, you could do planning, or have it so that instead of, it's telling you, hey, do something here, or execute, apply some chemicals here. That Those would have been the more nascent ones, and of course now we're getting into the spaces of, those machines are being able to do that themselves, follow their route planning, and they get instructions from the cloud. That's everyone's favorite word, the cloud, but they get instructions that are set or developed by, probably now AI is probably going to come on more and more, to go and follow. And
right.
in many ways, the operator is not only responsible for an extremely large machine now, but they're also responsible for understanding all this technology that's been stacked on top of them. So there's
Totally.
a funny story now, as sensors have come up. Everyone can think of when something in their car stops working, the light comes on because it's throwing a sensor. Well, it's a little
Yeah,
different when you're sitting in a machine that costs over $1 million that's stuck in the middle of a field
totally.
because a sensor doesn't work. So that's where I think that
That's
the intersecting of the two worlds for me has really gotten interesting, because it exposes bare the need to design thoughtful, useful products.
totally, yeah, and they're not uh a lot of the time they're not like totally sealed up in a nice gentle environment for them to exist, right? It's not a very
Oh
controlled
yeah.
situation. They're in wet, cold, mucky. Well, I mean, dirt,
Oh
dust,
yeah.
everything's happening with them. So, yeah, yeah. I mean, experience being in machines too. It's not what they used to be. And if anyone's been disconnected from like the farm, from
Oh
the
yeah.
history of running like a tractor, a couple generations separated now from that experience, it looks very different. It looks more like you're flying a plane in a
Oh
cockpit
yeah.
in many ways. There's so many buttons and there's a few screens up there. So,
It wouldn't look far removed with the way that they even do the controls now. You'll see, little joysticks
yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff like that, where there would be, steering wheels and other levers. Prior to that, it wouldn't be uncommon until you'd probably look at and see a lot of the elements that do come up in an aircraft, or a passenger aircraft, just with the way that data is now presented. There's
yeah,
screens that are showing constant amounts of data, that they're showing maps and various parameters, and there's control parameters all over the place to be tweaked, and that can modify the way that the equipment works. So it's really changed for those that were probably used to just getting in and kind of doing their thing in a very basic way.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome that you get to work in that space again, and like you said, be kind of back in there. It's funny how that cycles, and kind of went through a little bit of that in some of the marketing stuff. I found myself back in ag. I'm actually heading to Red Deer next week, for a quick trade show for agri-trade there, to check that out and help
Nice.
support someone's marketing efforts that way. So it's kind of funny. I'll
Awesome.
be back kind of out that way. I don't know if you're heading there for that, but um,
I'm not.
not yet.
Not,
It's only
not
next
yet.
week, but
No.
not yet. You never know. Yeah.
The and that's and in terms of it's funny you say how you found your way back, and even I did, because I didn't realize in many ways how much the domain really plays into how you can effectively work in a sector. So you would know a lot of the terminology they use, and I picked up a lot of it. I knew nothing about agriculture when I first was exposed to it, and but I've always been a proponent. If you're coming in from the technical side, you need to understand the people that you're working with in order to actually do them a service. So that's
Totally.
maybe some small advice for those that are still in school or whatever, is if you're a
Yeah.
technical person, if you really want to go somewhere, you do need to learn how to empathize with the people, and understand what you're doing for them. Otherwise, you're kind of a you're just an executioner in a way, that you're just actually just doing the work. But if you really want to be maximally effective at it, and enable wonderful things, you really do have to be willing to dig in, and using their terminology is a huge way to connect with people. It's
Totally.
you really have to
Yeah.
meet the minds there.
Well, yeah, I could not agree more. I actually still have behind this is just like a flop screen here, and maybe I did take it down. No, but for a while behind there, I worked with lots of Hutterite colonies before, and there's like a Hutterite map
Oh,
that I still had. Yeah, behind me there with where they all are. And it was just kind of like I
yeah,
always knew like my territory and stuff, and I mean that's just very specific culture to understand there,
yeah,
but it did wonders when taking time to understand and appreciate them. And I mean, I even went as far as I attended a wedding on a
oh,
colony
wow,
before, which is a super unique experience. Yeah, and just
wow.
some different. I mean, stopping in for coffee and growing those relationships is one thing, but um, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like a different thing. But like you say, you really got to get to know the client. So hopefully that's just like a good dovetail on what you were saying there, to give a good example in ag of a very unique customer base within the
I,
space that is very close to home. They're very large farmers. They're very
oh
tech
yes,
savvy. They should not be looked down upon. And like I think historically there's been some moments where people like have, and I think it's hopefully far surpassed that now, and they're not they're so far advanced. Anyways, like
oh
they're
yes.
supplying a lot of food too. So yeah,
Well, and I think that a lot of people would be surprised if they were to, go on, especially a
I
colony, like you say. There's a lot of,
yeah
whether it's a kind of a perception that it's permeated through media and other things of that.
yeah
But the reality is like you say, that they're probably more sophisticated technologically than a lot of other organizations.
yeah. I think it would be very surprising for a lot of people if they were
I think so.
you know understanding the culture with the tech that they have to be with and stuff. It's yeah, I don't know, give me a throwback here. I haven't been back in a while to a couple of them. I still keep in touch with actually quite a few, which is interesting. Leave me updates. What's going on,
Nice.
how's harvest, everything like that. So
Oh
what?
yeah, I remember getting looking at large 3D prints that were done. They had some of the
Oh
largest
my gosh.
3D printers in the if you needed that done in Manitoba,
Yeah.
it was, otherwise it was a significant investment, and yet there's a service that they had just as an offering.
Yeah. Just chilling there. Same with like lots of like laser cutters.
Yeah.
They have like an
Exactly,
intense
right?
an intense amount of laser cutting in Manitoba. It's kind of crazy.
Now there's diversification for you from a business perspective, right? Laser cutting in the shop, and out harvesting in the field, right? How different, or how much of a market space does that span? And yet,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And what's that? Hey, wait, something that you mentioned before about startups, and I think it was something we wanted to weave in here too, was the space that you're kind of involved in is working with
oh
existing
yeah,
companies. and an event that just happened. I happen to miss it, unfortunately, with our connector. We'll call him Marcus there.
There we go,
What
Mark.
was it? What was yeah, Marcus the connector. What was that event all about? How did you get involved in it? It seems like it's something when we were talking before that and I mean, referencing the website, everyone knows I kind of doing my own live until we have an extra person one day as a third body here. But I have the website pulled up here, which is just so cool. We'll get to that after for the links and stuff for that. But um, yeah, in terms of like I guess helping people through their processes and how you're helping folks who are just getting started.
For sure. So that's something where, yeah, and if you check out the website, it's because initially I thought it would be more focused to just looking at existing companies. Do you want to execute a product? But realistically, I kind of saw the startup roots, as still needing that. There's a lot of folks again there that could use assistance on that level, but it's a different. There is still the process. So I outline the process on how a product evolves, and that's still an important component, but it's also doing the kind of other product steps that we were kind of alluding to before, where intersecting the importance of making sure that there's viability there, and how sometimes it's some basic stuff like how, if you're a technical company, do you need some just assistance on some of the things. You kind of got a clear vision, but how do you scale this, or when's the right time to hire, or things like that that can be very challenging. And actually a lot of seemingly technical things or reality have a lot circling around it that should also be solved. So in many ways it can be a matter of, do you need help just understanding the technical feasibility if you're a non-technical
Right.
founder? And that was actually a central theme of Marcus's event that came through as we were planning it out. So he had a wonderful vision that he put together, which is something that I know I could have used even probably a year ago and stuff, which is, how do you get started? If you're interested, no matter what your background is, whether you were a developer in your past, if you're, are you a marketing person, whatever you are, that was his whole concept. And realistically, I think it's a great idea because as soon as he said it to me, it made perfect sense that he could help fill in the gaps. And we heard some awesome presentations. One of them was from Anna Lang, and she kind of talked about some of the mental components that come into, if you're having a hard time wrap your head around, why should I do this, or why should I, follow my dream, or why should I try this idea out? She kind of covered off a lot of that. So we packed a lot
Yeah.
into one week, and it was five nights of a different focal point every night. So we started off with, how do you decide to start, or what goes into thinking through that? We covered tech. We moved through other topics into even finding funding and what that looks like. That was covered on the Startup TNT Thursday nights at the King's Head.
Awesome.
That kind of overlapped there, and then finished up with
Yeah.
the mental component. And so the idea was help for getting started. It was called Scared Shitless, and it
Cool.
was trying to connect the dots in a even in a small way for some people.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome. And it's, I mean, on the page here, just to reference website for you, when you're on the website here, our process is very nicely laid out on this
Yes.
page here: concept, specification, development, testing and feedback, and then evaluation and launch, product lifecycle, and like that descriptor one here. When listener, if you go on there and check this out, I think this will make a lot of sense and definitely speaks to what you just said here in terms of not only, and you know what, I definitely agree with you there a lot about like the pumping up of things. Like there's tons of good ideas, but there's lots of action that has to come with it. And if that doesn't happen, you can talk about working out all the time, but if you don't go lift the weights, you're not gonna get any muscle, and there'll be no
It's
gain. You know?
exactly, and it can be painful. Like honestly, when you meet someone that is so passionate about their idea, or they have an idea that they want to see through, it's
Yeah,
hard to tell them that maybe that's going to be challenging, or that you're having a hard
yeah,
time connect the dots on the business side with them. But there's also a component there of that is also, when you're someone who likes to solve problems, that also represents an opportunity to at least try to help working through it, because unfortunately there's not really, at the end of the day, every business has to make money, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're, whatever you're looking to do. That is the reality. We hear a lot about the outliers. They make a lot of noise, but in reality, it's the big ones, the Facebooks and stuff like that. as you would know, Stephen, right? That's really the outliers. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
there's a lot on the side of the highway behind them, and there's many more than there are, the big
totally.
success stories. So reality
Yeah.
is if you can figure out a sustainable business model, sometimes it might be a lot more boring than you thought, but that's
Yes.
sometimes there's a wonderful product there, and it's just,
Yep.
maybe it sounds boring as hell to you, but hey, I guess if you're an entrepreneur, you got to be willing to adapt and
Yep.
respond to what the market's calling for.
I had someone say this to me. It still sticks. I don't know if you have these moments too, but I have some things, some little comments, both, like positive, negative, and wonderful things that have been, kind of, if that makes sense, as a three-tier breakdown. But
Yes.
um, there's one person asked me one time we were sitting down and I was, kind of pitching an idea still earlier on in the journey. They're like, okay, let's say you had like a paperclip business and you made 2 mil a year, would you do it? And I was like, I don't know. And now I'm like, yeah, 100%. That sounds
Me
wonderful.
too.
I'd be
Yes.
like, it is really fun to chase the exciting thing. It's not really about the some of it's about, like the potential. And I know a lot of people do chase like the number thing, or they look at some numbers and they see the thing, but there's knowing how things fail from other experiences, and knowing, you're gonna have to go through quite a bit of pain to get to what you're looking for right now. Some people skip
Oh
that
yeah.
step. They go right to it versus kind of growing into that number. Because I think sometimes well, you hear it said all the time, and I think you got a good appreciation, and listener, you probably do too, for timing on things, just existing and having the right things figured out, and knowing that you don't have to hit take a month off just to focus on one specific thing in your startup. Might be really good advice for someone too. You've probably even heard like that, maybe said, you don't have to like crush the sale. I mean, if you have a really well planned year and you're working another job, you you could have like a month where you make the same amount as your day job if you have, planned well enough for a trade show or a launch of a product or whatever it is. Like, we used to work in real estate on my end, and you'd see realtors work really hard and they wouldn't get paid for a while because houses don't move as fast in the winter. But summer hits and all of a sudden they sold 4 houses. I don't want to speak out of tongue here, but we're just doing the reverse math on that. Like the 2% on like even a $500,000 house, that's half their commission. Usually that's 10K right there. And if you're hitting multiples of that in, that 1 month, then all of a sudden you made 50K for 5 houses real quick, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
But it's
And
all the work that they did ahead of time, all that marketing, all this other stuff that people don't really see. But it's your point too, like you see the sold sign when they're like, hey, we sold, right?
exactly,
But you
right.
don't see like anything else that's gone on, all the calls, all the figuring out, like, okay, possession date, what is wrong with the house? Or if there is an issue with the house, how are we solving it for the handing off of ownership? So
Oh,
yeah,
oh yeah, and and the reality is that for anyone trying, there are going to be those days where it probably does. You sit there and you scratch your head and you wonder, should you just throw in the towel, or and in many ways
yeah,
it's I mean it's okay, like you say, if you're working that full-time job, right? If you can find an opportunity to do that, or to make it, it's a way to kind of give some security to it too, in a way, right? It's as
yeah.
cool as it sounds to think that there's a world where everyone just quits their jobs and is founding and making it. The reality is, can you afford to say, if you're a realtor, or you want to be a realtor, for example, right?
Yeah, you're taking a
I
big risk
understand
doing it.
that big risk. So, do you understand the cash flow, right? Or you got caught up in the hype? And I will say this, and I
Yeah,
know from personal experience, it's so easy to get caught up in a lot of the hype coming at you from so many spaces. There's so many
yeah,
people
yeah,
that want to tell you that they can make you $1 million, but in reality, if you take a step back and you realize that they're making their money by telling you that.
to go and do it. Yeah,
So kind of always try to check the reality of the space on that. It's funny. Everyone says about
yeah,
LinkedIn, and everyone says, we were talking about it, getting on LinkedIn,
yeah,
and I know I need to market better and understand how to get more comfortable with posting on LinkedIn. But yet for me, there's days where LinkedIn is the most toxic place on earth, because you get wrapped up in your head and you're looking at what someone
yeah,
else is doing, or you see something, you're like, I missed that, or I how did I not know about that? And or why, why does this person have more insight than me? And there, it's kind of challenging. And yet there's other days where you go in there and you can enjoy everyone else's successes because you're having
Yeah,
a good day on your own. And
that's
uh,
a really good point. That is
yeah.
really good because, but it's a hard thing, like you were saying too, because you're seeing the sold sign, so to say, when you see those posts, whatever, right? But you're like, okay, wait, what happened 3 months before that?
Well,
Because
and
stuff you're
it's
working
funny.
on now, you're gonna have a post like that in the future, right? And then it's like,
Oh yeah, it was. It's funny you say about the sold sign. It was a few weeks ago, and it was a good reminder of exactly that. That right, the work that goes into it. Because I saw the realtor rolling up, and I'd seen the house for a few months in there, and I saw them rolling up that day to put the sign on that said sold. They had that little hanger to get on there, and it
yeah,
was just a good reminder that it's often magic because it happens during the day when everyone's out at work or at home in their home office working. I happened to be out for a stroll at that point, and getting a
right,
coffee, and I was like, oh yeah, it was just a good reminder of all the ways that those things come to be, and all the work that's actually involved.
yeah, absolutely. What would be like a good person to get or yeah, who's someone that should talk to you? I guess maybe
Yeah,
in a weird way, like who's your customer or person you're working with? I don't know how you verse it that way, but
for sure. So if you have something you want to add smarts to, like it's an existing company, or you have a product that you'd like to augment with sensors, for example, or do something on that level. If it's a little more mature, no problem. That's a great fit. Or if there's an app you wanted to develop or connect to something, we do. I've done a lot of hardware connected, mobile apps sort of stuff. But the other side of it is if you're a non-technical founder and you're trying to vet the idea, and we talked about risk in business, and one thing that getting into the service industry, a lot of business models revolve around trying to isolate yourself and your company, rightly so. As I mentioned, you got to make money from that
yeah,
risk, but I've kind of tried to be more flexible with that and acknowledging that the risk is better carried by both parties. And if you work with someone and you do understand what they have at play and what they're risking, and likewise that goes both ways, that there's an opportunity to share that risk, I find that makes the venture much better because you're actually both partners at that point. You're not just you know provider and client.
totally,
It's a much more, this is our venture, at least for this small point in time. It's our venture. If it might be advice, or it might be if it's how to actually make something happen. So again, if you're kind of down at the full spectrum, if you're into that non-technical range, not sure how to get started, it's worth at least a conversation. And there doesn't have to be anything. You know, we can look at the feasibility of it, or even if it's like, what is it going to take to do? Maybe because it all looks like magic, right? I had this conversation with someone yesterday. If there's a UI on it, right, or if there's a user interface on it, like a web app or whatever it is, that it looks like magic that it works, right? Because you think of the button on the page, but no one ever thinks of what it takes to make the button do its thing. And the reality is there can be a lot involved depending on what that thing is. So, it can help just right size your idea, or let what you're in for if you want to try to pursue this more. And maybe it's not the right time to try to work together, or maybe it's just a referral to someone who might be a better fit. But there's that, to me, is always a conversation worth happening, because the thing that you then realize when you start to take that approach of saying, well, it's better to partner in the risk, is everyone does better if everyone else is uh, thriving and able to innovate, in my sense. So that's what kind of, if anyone looks at the website, I recently rebranded it to say, impossible is nothing. Uh,
yes, that's
you
one
know,
of the coolest opens for the website. Everyone should go check it out.
oh,
At the
thank
very
you.
least,
I
there to just
appreciate
like
that.
check out the open because I'm like, oh, where's the homepage? And it's like impossible is nothing. Then click to go home, and it's very cool.
Yeah. So, and the idea being like, it's true, like almost anything you can build, but it's kind of, how do we figure out the middle pieces? Because especially if you're looking at hiring tech people, that's something that as a non-technical person, if
Yeah,
one piece of, I guess, unsolicited advice to those that are looking to get started, and I threw this out at Scared Shitless too, is, you really got to find some people that are okay with understanding. The last thing you want is to be a non-technical person who's working their hardest to market and sales, but you're with someone that you can't talk the reality of business with. There are a lot of
yeah,
people that scares the shit out of them to hear that we only have like 6 weeks of money left, or we only have 3 months to build a whole product or
totally.
something resembling a product. If you get someone that's comfortable with that environment, then they'll help you build what you can actually sell or figure out what it is. Uh, and
Yep.
unfortunately, it's not the best fit for you if you're not comfortable with that. And that would be my the advice to the other side of the fence is maybe make sure that if you can't operate well in that environment, it's going to be very challenging to learn and grow. But yet, it's a fantastic opportunity to do so if you're on the younger end of the experience side.
That's awesome. And I just pulled up the other um, screen here about like how to contact you. Well, it's under contact us. It looks a little bit
Yes,
more formal, but maybe just saying out loud, like it's probably not meant to be that like formal, so to say, because
100% no.
I'm just picking up vibes there, and like the way I read it in some ways, not to like make it sound like it is too serious or anything, but it's like first name, last name, company, phone, email, message. Keep it simple, probably, and just get it in there if they are
Yeah,
interested in getting a hold of you.
exactly. And realistically, and the LinkedIn thing works great too. You can find me
And
there,
LinkedIn,
and
right?
that's always an easy one.
Do you want to list off or just your LinkedIn page yourself, Mathew
Yeah,
Grabau?
it's Mathew Grabau, and I'm the only one that I know of. So that's okay. That's
And
okay.
it goes one T, and then
It is
and the website. I'll let you list this off here. How do we type that in there for? We'll have it on our link too, for them
for
to find
sure.
it. But it's
It's
Grabau.
Grabau Innovation-innovations.com.
Awesome, and they'll have the cool message pop up on the front end here when they go there.
You
So
bet.
that's awesome. Well, I think this has been awesome. It's been great to chat about like I guess we'll call it like lightly dance around like experiences and industry of ag a lot more than I thought that we were talking about today. In some ways, I knew that we were going to go down that path, given what you're working on now. But I'm excited for people to get a hold of you and connect and explore their idea with you. I think you'd be a great fit for lots of folks that are in that space. So be an
Yeah,
easy pass along for me personally and hopefully for a listener, and maybe they're even exploring an idea and they want to chat with you with in terms of sensors and creating more of the tech side of things and making some decisions from your perspective in business.
for
I think that's
sure.
awesome.
Thanks for having me on, Stephen. I really appreciate that and all the insights
Yeah.
that you've provided into the world of marketing as well. Something that I am less familiar with and need to get more familiar with.
It's okay. It's been it's awesome to chat and give little feeds like that, and hopefully have success with some of those things. So that's been
Okay.
awesome, Matthew. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you later.
You too. Thank you.